So many of the folks in the business world rarely think that they have a profit problem. The irony is, if you were profitable at 2 million, less profitable at 5 million, and break even at 10 million, how is it that you think that getting to 11, 12, or 15 is somehow going to magically cure what ails you?
Welcome back to Exploring Growth. So Ben helps founder CEOs of the 2 million to 50 million range companies uncover what he calls profititis. It's the operational efficiencies and inefficiencies and margin leaks that quietly stall growth and create blind spots in performance. And we're going to get into that in a minute. I'm really excited about having this discussion with Ben on how companies can become more profitable. So welcome to the show.
Lee, thanks for having me. I can't wait to get into profititis and this whole topic.
That's great. Let's do it. What is profititis?
In its simplest form, profititis is when your top line revenue is either strong, stable, or growing, but your bottom line is not keeping pace with that top line growth or stability.
So you probably see this a lot with companies, because I know I see it where spending money on stuff they shouldn't spend. They're, working on growth as they should. And I've had guests on the show before. We talked about this balance between growth and profit, and I want to get into it with you as well. So, when you go in and you look at companies, what do you normally see? Like, what's the major thing that you see right off the bat that you pretty much see it all the time?
Sure. Well, just like a heart surgeon doesn't probably treat all that many Ironman triathletes.
Yeah.
They tend to see people who have heart disease, right? So my business, called Profit Doctor, is primarily seeing patients, if you will, that have issues with profitability. So generally speaking, I divide the world of business into two camps. There are those that are above average profitability, and there are those that are below average profitability. And generally speaking, my practice is helping people in that below average profitability bucket get into the above average profitability bucket.
Okay, that's a great analogy. And I love that you're using the sort of medical world, because I had an instance not too long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, where I basically was having an ulcer in my stomach, and I went to a GI doctor. And the whole office, including the doctor, looked at me crossways, because they're like, "Why are you here?" Mm-hmm. You're like a relatively young, fit, guy that takes care of himself. Like, we don't see you very often, right? So I have to imagine in the business world, it has to be similar in that, are those below average companies thinking on their own, hey, we need to go see a doctor, right? We need to figure out why we're losing, why we're not profitable. Or are you just getting the, knock on your door from actually profitable companies because they're being proactive? How does that come across your desk?
Sadly, I would say that profititis is a bit of a silent killer, as long as we're going to follow this medical metaphor, maybe to its too far conclusion here. My point is that so many of my clients and so many of the folks in the business world in general rarely think that they have a profit problem. Almost everybody feels that they have a revenue problem. So many of both my clients and people who should be my clients, right, think that they have a revenue problem. And they are basically trying to sell their way out of that problem. The irony is, if you were profitable at 2 million, less profitable at 5 million, and break even at 10 million, how is it that you think that getting to 11, 12, or 15 is somehow going to magically cure what ails you? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, generally speaking, it doesn't. And that would be a classic example of profititis, right? Where at 1, 2, 3 million, the business is quite profitable. And as they are investing, pushing harder for growth, they're getting the growth, but the profitability is sagging. And then sadly, as profitability continues to sag, they kind of get on this hamster wheel where they need to push, or they feel they need to push harder and harder around growth, when, to my way of thinking, they would do so much better if they carved out 10 to 20% of their energies to focus specifically around profitability instead of just, 150% pedal to the metal on growth.
That's interesting. So you're seeing companies that are, startup to 3 to 5 million, you're seeing them as relatively profitable. And we're talking mostly in the B2B world, just for clarification, but you're seeing them as mostly profitable. And as they scale up past 5 million to 10 million and plus, that's where they start to run thinner on margins.
I'm going to pull back from that a little bit. I don't want to say you put words in my mouth, but maybe I just didn't quite mean it that way.
Yeah, okay.
At almost every size, there's a distribution of profitability. Mm-hmm. Now, as companies get smaller, sometimes that profitability can be, let's just rewind for a minute. Mm-hmm. On average, when we look at companies, let's say 1 to 20 million across the United States in almost every industry, we're broadly looking at, on the very bottom, negative a few points, let's say -1 to -5. Mm-hmm. Usually can't stay negative for that long, right. But the bottom 10% are generally in the negative bucket, going up to about 20%. So there are definitely outliers, but I'm kind of looking at the sweet middle here. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So that means that the bottom half of the range, we'll just say 1 to 20 million on average, is negative a couple of points up to, we'll call it 8, 9, 10, depending on all the dependables. Mm-hmm. And then the top half of the range starts somewhere around 8, 9, 10 and goes broadly to 20. There are plenty of examples that are higher than 20.
Sure.
But let's just sort of round things out and call it 0 to 20. So what I'm saying is it's incredibly, incredibly common that companies who were in the low teens start heading down towards 0 as they're growing, because they're doing more things unnaturally to grow, to try to push growth. And as a result, their profitability is going down. Now, many people would say, well, that's normal because we're investing in growth. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's one of the worst and most dangerous self-inflicted BS myths that I hear, which is it's okay that our profit is terrible because we're growing so quickly. What I tend to see more often than not is that those companies that are growing are neither optimizing themselves for profitability nor for growth. In many cases, they're not pushing the boundary where another dollar of growth has to come from profit. I often see if they were to disentangle growth thinking from profitability thinking, they could actually grow faster and be more profitable.
That's interesting. Yeah. So expand on that a little bit more. When you say disentangle that, dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. I had a buddy, very robust entrepreneur. This is a fellow that generally has got his finger in 5 or 6 different companies. Mm-hmm. And we used to do some paddleboarding together. So we're out on the lake here in downtown Austin, and we're talking about this. And he's giving me the same old spiel right out of Inc. magazine, Fast Company, Silicon Valley, everything. And he's saying, my profitability is not good, but that's because I'm reinvesting everything in growth. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to invite him to disentangle those things. And what I mean by that is there's a certain part of your business that I might call the run rate of your business. So that is the part that is organically growing, the regular operations. This is the part which absolutely should be optimized for profitability. Mm-hmm. Now, separately, if you want to put the pedal to the metal on growth and you're sort of investing, if you will, the profitability from this half or outside monies, to drive growth, that's okay. I actually invited him to think of having 2 separate P&Ls, one for the run rate of the business and a separate one for the growth investments. The thing that is often going on is if you have a company that if you weren't making all those growth investments should be at 15% net profit, right?
Right.
but you are making those growth investments, and now your business is at 3% net profit. Mm-hmm. You might be telling yourself, it's okay because I'm making all these growth investments. My hypothesis is you're probably leaving at least 5 points on the table because you're not optimizing for profitability. So what I find happens is, number one, they're not optimizing for profitability. We'll just say trimming away the things that are holding them back. Mm-hmm. And they're being sloppy with their growth initiatives, because by conflating all that together, they end up with a suboptimal number, and they excuse the softer growth mm-hmm. because it's all mixed together. Yeah. And they kind of excuse the weak profitability because, hey, we're growing so fast and investing in growth.
That's a great explanation. It makes so much more sense now. So what you're saying then is the company should focus in more and optimize for profitability first, and then reinvest that profit in growth second, versus investing in growth for the sake of growth, thinking that they are reinvesting their profit, which they may not actually be making as much profit as they think, because they're not looking at their numbers as clean as they should be.
Mm-hmm. I like how you said that. And I might just reframe it a little bit. I kind of said one thing, and it's highly suggestive of another thing, which I haven't said yet.
Okay.
The first thing I was talking about is, if you put your growth investments and your operations all in a blender, mm-hmm. and you get 3% net profitability and 20% growth, you might excuse what could have been faster growth mm-hmm. and higher profitability. So I invite people to tease those two sets of numbers apart mm-hmm. so they can optimize for each set individually.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's so one thing. And then the second thing that you said, was doing the sequence, one thing versus another. You know, I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. And when I was in, I think it was West Palm Beach, going to his business mastery class, now I forgot he's very big on the sequence of things. Yeah. And so I'm very big on the sequence of things when we talk about profitability and growth. Generally speaking, for my clients, let's say broadly B2B services, construction, trades, we'll call it regular old businesses as compared to Silicon Valley, SaaS, tech, platform companies along the way.
Venture back, yeah.
We'll call it 98 to 99% of the world, right?
Yes, right.
In that case, once you're above $1 million or $2 million in revenue, generally speaking, I would highly encourage those business owners to get their profitability right before they start scaling. A highly profitable $3 million company is a great asset to have and a great business to run. No shame in being 2 million instead of 20 million when you're running 23% net profit. All good there. But when you are running 23% net profit in that example, it's very suggestive that you're delivering top-notch value for your clients. You've figured out where your sweet spot is. Mm-hmm. You're able to deliver it with excellence and efficiency. That's the kind of gem that is tailor-made to then potentially, if you choose to, scale that up to 5, 10, 15, 20, 200 million, right? Rather than taking a business that's 3% net margin at 20 million and trying to put your foot on the gas. That's a very, very scary place to be.
Yes, and that's well said. The way I come at it is this idea of having your house in order. Mm-hmm. So if you take your core offering or the model of what you're selling and you have it all worked out as you're describing, to the point where you're making as much profit as possible, but also serving your customers as well as possible. You really understand your customers. You're getting feedback from your customers. I'm a big proponent of that. Communication's there, and you're starting to build, if not have built, systems around how this infrastructure works. So you're being as potentially as efficient as you can be with it, scaling up something like that to the degree that it needs to be scaled. Because I think also you might find that you can't scale those margins. You can't scale those teams. You can't scale it to the degree that you want to. But even if you can, scaling something like that, it makes so much more sense than just scaling, but basically for the sake of scale, because you think that's what the next stage should be. I think taking a beat, hitting the brakes and saying, how are we delivering? Do we understand our business really well inside and out? And then scaling something that is well thought through is a much more prudent way of operating, of serving your customers and serving your team. That's going to build a good culture as well, which we all know is, a fabric to scale. So I'm with you on all that. I think that is completely 100% true. I don't see companies doing that because a lot of times, there's a lot of problems, right? I mean, there's one thing that's putting pressure, or it's another, or they may just think that they have to continue to follow the sales, right? And so they create problems for themselves. So I guess that would be a good kind of bridge to the question that a lot of people are probably thinking as they're watching an episode like this, and that is, okay, if I have profit problems, then what do I do about solving them, right? So I would say, as we work our way towards answering that question, I would next want to say, where do you see these profit margins leaking out of the company? Where do you see mostly when you work with companies, where do you see them leaking profit?
Mm-hmm. Before we even get into where most companies are leaking profit, the thing that you said that really stuck out to me is when people need to improve their profitability, what should they do? Mm-hmm. I think for so many people, the most important thing is to realize that they do have a profit problem, not to, pull an old thread from like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
The first step is knowing that you have a problem. Mm-hmm. And so many of my clients and so many of people out in the world, and I sort of touched on this before, feel like that they have a revenue problem instead of a profitability problem.
Right.
And so they're pushing the gas so hard to grow from 2 to 3 or 10 to 11 or 20 to 30 or 500 to 550. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, I would say that they have a profitability problem worse and first before they might have a need for incremental revenue. So I think that's number one. Number two is so many people are not doing some of the simplest things, some of the most direct things to tackle profitability. So if your idea of improving profitability is selling more stuff, I think maybe you missed the memo. There are a lot of much, much more direct tools for improving profitability. This one is more improving cash versus profitability. But let me just share one of the most obvious and simple things that people do unwittingly in an emergency, but not as a regular course of action. And that's collections. If you have a $2 million company and you are aware that in the next 20 days, you are not going to be able to meet payroll, most B2B services companies, the first thing they might do is start calling their customers to collect. Mm-hmm. Well, surprisingly, when you call your customers to collect, you get more money in the door faster. Mm-hmm. Why are they not doing this all the time in that fictitious example? That is an example of how pulling a very simple, very direct lever, collections, mm-hmm. can improve cash flow. So you could try to sell more stuff to improve your cash flow. But as it turns out, generally speaking, growth eats cash. It doesn't provide cash in the short term, right? And so I just bring that up as one very, very simple example. Another one, of course, is trimming expenses. One thing that I love talking about is the 10X rule. And what I mean by this is, let's come up with a fictitious example. So let's say we have a plumbing company that does $5 million of revenue at the end of the year, and they're doing pretty good. They're probably just into the top half, maybe at 10% net profitability. So 5 million top line, $500,000 net profit bottom line, 10%, right? Mm-hmm. So if this company were to sell another $1 million worth of revenue, 5 to 6 at 10%, they would go from 500 to 600. So $1 million top line, 100,000 bottom line. So what you've got there is they had to sell $10 to get $1 extra to the bottom line. Mm-hmm. The reason I call this the 10X rule is if you just saved $1 of not spending, it's worth, in this example, $10 of extra revenue.
Yes.
And for those of you who have a really bad profit problem, you're probably way below 10% net profit. Mm-hmm. If you're at 5% net profit, you have a 20x multiple on saving $1 of expenditure. And so some of those expense cuttings are as simple as, gosh, do we really need 13 pro subscriptions to Zoom? Could we get away with 8 or something along those lines? So that is what I call more traditional expense cutting. And just because it's traditional doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It's a very good idea because, again, that 10x, or for those of you who have a profit problem, 20x or 40x multiplication of that benefit, right? Saving $1,000 a month, $12,000 in a year might be worth, $120,000, $250,000 a year in revenue, right? Mm-hmm. But that can be extended to not just be, quote, classic expenses, but what about servicing a market that doesn't perform for you? So the leverage, the traction, the impact on your business of, we'll call it trimming, not just expenses, but things that are doing that are not working. I have a rule for my clients. I say, stop doing what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to fix some things. But generally speaking, if you've been trying to fix something for 6 months to 6 years and it ain't fixed yet, it's at least worth considering that you should just stop it, right? Not just stop trying to fix it, but stop doing it entirely. And if that means divesting yourself and your business from a particular customer, a customer segment, a location, a type of product or service, maybe a person on your team, etc., that actually offers some of the most valuable traction to my clients. Because not only are those things typically highly, highly profit negative, but they're usually the bane of your existence. They're sucking the soul and the time from you and your management team. We'll just say the worst customer you have is soul sucking for so many people in your company. And chances are you'd be better off without them.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you're creating all kinds of issues by letting these problems persist, because if you really look into the problem and you say, okay, I'm going to focus on this for a minute, you might actually find that a lot of your employees have been screaming this from the top of their lungs for a number of months or years to say, hey, why do we have to keep doing this? This is not working for us. Because your employees are going to know, what's working, what's not working, because they're on the front lines. But this is good. It makes you think of like a service type company that might have a route, and they have this one customer that's kind of out in the boonies, and they took on that customer thinking they were going to expand out in that territory, and that they never did. So right. I think, like to your example, it'd be good to take a look at that customer. Are they costing you opportunities other places? Are they costing you all the money it takes to service them? Are you really making money on that account? Are you actually going to expand? And so, what's the plan there? If not, then it might be a good time to just forget about that plan and, focus your efforts back on the territory that's working.
Absolutely. It reminds me of actually a whole portfolio of my clients where part of what's been, quote, wrong with their businesses is that they have been serving, let's just say, 2 to 4 markets or product spaces, but one of them is a loser for them. So I'll just give you one example. This was a company in the B2B type services. They had 3 core divisions, each about $1 million a year in revenue. So roughly a $3 million a year company. When I met with them, they were losing 10% a year or a month. They were just 10% negative, right? Which if you are funding 10% a year losses from your $3 million company, either out of your pocket or very commonly out of debt, whether it's a line of credit or back in the day, PPP, EIDL, ERC, the whole alphabet soup of that sort of thing. very, very expensive, very scary. And speaking of soul sucking and soul crushing, it is a heavy, heavy weight. So fast forward, working with this client, he realized that of his 3 divisions, all of his time and energy primarily was in the one division that was most broken. Surprise, that might be ringing a bell for some of you out there. What we ultimately worked to do is to get out of that service line. And while it sounds scary to divest yourself of something that was a third of your revenue, and by the way, that's not the first line of defense on everything, but here he had been trying to fix that for 2 years. So 2 years later, his company is tanking because he can't fix this one division. And it's taking up all the time that he could be investing in maximize, growing, doubling down on the other 2 divisions that were doing good, right? So what ended up happening there is they closed down that one division, and then he invigorated himself, re-energized, doubled down on those other 2 sweet spots. And immediately that business went from negative 10% net loss to positive 10% net profitability. And all of a sudden he's sleeping better. He gave himself a raise. The company is making money, and he feels like $1 million instead of like a sad sack. And it was really one of my big wins. I really loved helping him.
That's amazing. Yeah. It sounds like there's so many ways to attack this problem of profititis, that you can find leaky profits it kind of makes me think of the leaky gut, talk about there's leaky profits in companies. I'm curious. I know in our pre-call, you were showing me an example of a client that you had just had a big win with. Can you tell me a little bit about that story? I'm curious to know more.
Sure. This was a company that was in we'll call it the construction projects business, right? So B2B services company serving mostly like industrial and that kind of market space. So the customer comes to them and say, hey, I need a certain system. And then they go out, they quote it, then they win the proposal, and then they install some stuff, tune it, fix it, and submit an invoice. So it's that kind of a business, right? So we'll call it, broadly speaking, construction services or trades kind of business. What had been happening is they were creating the estimate, and then the people who were building and installing that system really were not that aware of how much the bid and the estimate was for. And then they were not getting regular updates of how much work and cost and labor or time had been invested in the implementation or installation. So how they were tracking, progress milestones. And then at the end, they were not doing sort of an after action. And so what was happening is that over time, generally speaking, they were losing money on most of those projects. And so you can already get the punchline here because I sort of already teed it up. But essentially by making sure the installation and delivery team was more aware upfront of what the proposal was in terms of materials and man hours, so to speak. And then let's say it's a month-long project. Every week that installation and delivery team needs to know, we have already spent X% of the cost, whether it's materials and labor, and we have gotten through Y% of the work. And so we want to make sure that starts tracking all the way through the end. And so, for example, if 50% of the way through the money, you're 30% of the way through the work, those guys need to, we'll just say, hustle to deliver that project on time and on budget. And then when you get to the end, that opens the door for more of a post-mortem. How did we do? Did we hit, on time, on budget, on quality, or did we go over? And what was the reason for that? Sometimes the bid was wrong, right? Sometimes it was something else, but hopefully over time you can fix that. So that helped this company that had been at net zero or break-even profitability, basically zero profitability in 2023 and 2024, shift where they were from January when we started working with them with 25 till just a couple of weeks ago to 20% net profitability. I mean, that is another one of these sort of miracle turnaround stories. I don't want to suggest that all my clients go from 0 or negative to a 20-point jump, but we'll just say, for example, 20 points on $2 million a year of revenue is a $400,000 net profitability swing. Or for 10 million, that is a $2 million net profit swing. 20 million, unsurprisingly, 4 million. So it's a lot. Sometimes people forget that, again, that's kind of the 10X rule at work. Just 1 or 2 points of profitability translates into a lot of dollars at the end of the year. So really valuable there.
Yeah, it really points to the fact that these companies should be looking at profit more closely because the levers they can pull have such a big impact.
Absolutely.
Conversely to trying to get new sales and the inertia that it takes to get that started and keep that going. I know that all so well. I mean, it takes so much money and energy and to get that going, to get a fraction of an impact that you would get on this side.
Right. If I could just expand a little bit on what you just said. So let's pretend you're running $10 million a year in revenue. And we're like, well, we want to sell some more stuff. So this example, we're going to say that this company is 10 million a year in revenue, 5% net profitability. So after the owner pays themselves a salary, they are sitting at something like $500,000 of net profitability. And they want to go to 11 million. So they want to sell another $1 million worth of stuff. Do you think it's likely that it's going to be more profitable that next million? Like whatever it was that they were spending to go from 9 million to 10 million, do you think all of a sudden they're going to be able to go from 10 to 11 and spend much less and have much higher profitability? No. Now, there are some industries where you have to invest in a whole factory, and now it's like break-even math. Right. But in B2B services, it's rarely like that.
Right.
So if you had to spend, we'll just pretend, $900,000 to get that last million, it's unlikely that you're going to spend less than $900,000 to get this next million. Because if you had some way to do that, why the heck wouldn't you already be doing it? Right? If you had another lever that could get you that million at half the cost of what you're doing to get the previous million you just got, well, maybe you should stop doing the old thing and do the new thing.
That's right.
Right? So it's very rare that you can just pull the growth lever and somehow get all that extra growth with no cost. But in many, many cases, tweaking some things internally, typically stop doing some things that aren't working, can dramatically increase profitability at very, very low effort and cost. Because generally speaking, getting rid of something that's a train wreck is profit positive and usually doesn't, like, getting rid of it, you're not giving up a lot of good things. Generally, you're just giving up bad things. So it's almost a net win for everything.
Agreed. And this is what I find so fascinating about business is that there's this jigsaw puzzle. We got to figure out how the pieces go together. And it's not always that straightforward. Sometimes you don't even get the edge pieces first, right? But it's like, I see companies who do figure out levers to pull that are more cost effective to add growth. Like, for example, they may have gotten to a place where they pulled the PR lever and had some really good placements that, injected a lot of growth, and it was good earned growth.
Sure.
And I think there are times when you can grow your company cheaper than you grew it before without replacing old systems. And sometimes, when you come up, you are trying to figure out what is actually going to be the system, because you're just trying to get sales from wherever you can get them, because you're also, back to our first part of our conversation, still forming your model, you're still forming your core offering. All of that stuff is still forming. So I think that's where a lot of CEOs and founders get sucked into, those day-to-day fires and conversations about what are we selling to whom, and what does that actually look like before they are really, dialing more into the profit conversation. But I think once you get to a certain scale, like we were talking about 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, I think it is very imperative to take a step and look at what your profit is doing in all these cases, right? You might find that you can find a profitable growth lever for adding new money that doesn't cost you a lot, but you might not. You might find that you have to completely reinvent sales for the next stage of growth, and that's going to be adding new players to your team, and there's more salaries that go there and benefits, et cetera. So that's what I think is so fascinating about the jigsaw puzzle of growing a company, is that it's not so linear, but it kind of is at the same point. You have to think about it in different ways and different stages. Going back to what you were saying before, talking about really you were describing, something that really makes my ears perk up, is this idea of losing money in the gaps of communication. Is the way I would phrase it. There's handoffs from one department to another, from one rep to another, from this part of the company to that part of the company. And those handoffs get botched from miscommunication, where not all the information is given. In your example, they go out to deliver the project, and not everyone is fully aware of what is being delivered on what time schedule, to what degree, and they're not even doing a recap debrief to get the feedback from everyone that was involved. So when you start putting all of these mechanisms of proper communication in place, you're building systems essentially, but you're focused on the communication pieces and the handoffs. That's where you're going to really start to plug a lot of holes in leaky buckets, because now people are more clear about how to deliver the product. Again, going back to what it is that we're doing and how are we adding value to our customer. And you're going to find that you have more profit at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, you covered a lot of stuff, and I'm 100% in agreement with all the things. One thread that I just wanted to pull out is what I call Money Monday. And the idea there is to schedule, doesn't have to be Monday. It could be tune up, or turn it up Tuesday, or winning Wednesday, or pick your favorite.
It's got to be alliterated.
Approach. Where I'm going with that is so many CEOs are so focused on growth, or what I call the sausage making, internal operations, that they are not carving out some time for profitability specifically. Mm-hmm. So in that example that I shared, where they were not doing the kind of the postmortem and the milestone understanding of, what had been spent and how far they had gotten and so forth, it's generally because they were chasing revenue, which is so common. But my point here is, if that CEO had said, Tuesday from 9 to 11 every week, come hell or high water, I'm going to carve out 2 hours and focus on profitability. Pretty sure that he would have come to that conclusion on his own, which is, I'm losing money on these installations. Why do you think it is? Well, let me start doing some digging. We keep bidding these things that will make up a number, $20,000 for an install. And then how much did it cost us? It cost us $22,000 instead of $15,000. Mm-hmm. And that is where all our margin, if you will, leaked out of the bucket. So one thing I just wanted to point out is there are often very direct pathways to improving profitability. Many of them are fairly straightforward, but if you're 150% focused on internal operations, separate from profit, there's a lot of them, HR issues, problems, etc., and growth, sometimes you're not putting some time, carving out a consistent chunk of time to take on those direct pathways of improving profitability. You can leave a lot of money on the table. And again, that's what I call Money Mondays. That is a core prescription that I would offer for anybody on this call. Are you and your senior leaders carving out a chunk of time every week to focus on those direct pathways to profitability?
I like that a lot. It's very practical, because I was going to ask you, for those companies who don't have a CFO, or someone dedicated to that part of the organization. Founder CEOs, right? They're just taking it from every angle. How do they approach that? And I think that's a great practical way to do that, to carve out the time to say, okay, here we are, 9 a.m. again this week, and let's look at these areas. Let's dig into our core offering, and how'd the last project go? And start asking these questions of your team and of your product and of your customers. And I think that's going to start to be very revealing.
If I were to boil down, I guess we're 41 minutes into this thing, so to speak, what I might prescribe as a general elixir to help everybody in that bottom half of the profit stack, and frankly, in the top half of the profit stack, but even most tuned to that bottom half. Number one is what I broadly put underneath the umbrella of profit psychology. And that is shaking yourself away from this myth of growth, and appreciating the fact that profitability is so dang important. And for all of you who own your own company, you're in the 99%, plumbers and dry cleaners and B2B services and stuff, and not Silicon Valley darling, unicorn wannabe, unlimited funding, operating at a deficit for years kind of thing. Probably the most important thing is that business is generating, let's just say, roughly double-digit net profit at the end of the year. So the first thing is sort of that profit psychology or profit prioritization. Get some profit, often at a much higher impact, value, significance priority than just more growth. So that's number one. Number two, I kind of touched on it, which is, again, Money Monday. I don't know if it's Freaky Friday, but that also is at least alliterative.
Someone might be in that situation.
We don't have a lot of FF Fridays or whatever, but that idea of carving out 1 to 4 hours where you're focused specifically on profitability in the most direct pathways possible, and ideally including some of your leadership team, arguably the whole company, but for sure some of your key leaders. And then number three, I think I touched on it before, but stop doing what isn't working. If you're looking for the prescription of how to have some of the best, fastest, quickest turnaround style returns on your effort, it would be to stop doing those things that are broken, that are not working, that you've been working on for a long time, and you haven't made that much traction and are basically boat anchors on your business. So if we were going to do a metaphor, imagine you're in a hot air balloon and you're barely, the wind is blowing and you're barely off the ground. And every once in a while you're like, oh my gosh, I hope we don't hit that tree. One approach is to start trying to expand the balloon. That's the metaphor for grow in order to get more lift. But boy, how about we toss out some dead weight from the basket, right? Lighten our load. And again, a metaphor for that might be a market, a location, a product, an underperforming element of your business, where you can essentially raise the bar on what is acceptable by tossing out of the basket that dead weight, and that can make that balloon, jump and miss the tree or the hill or the house that you're about to run into.
That's great. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing all your ideas. Had a lot of great ideas. And so now that we close this out, give my audience just your interpretation of what you do. What kind of companies do you work for? And typically, what you're helping them do, and then where can they go to find you?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. So the business is called Profit Doctor, Profit, Doctor, Doctor. It's not profit like Muhammad. Yeah. It's profit like making money. And it's not just DR. It's, spelled out the whole way. That would be a great place to start. I think you can just book a consultation with me there. Also, my name is Ben Hansen, Profit Doctor Ben. Almost all those words get you to me. I like to think I'm big on LinkedIn. You could find me there as well. Yeah. We're here in Austin, Texas. But if you were to think, who is it that we help? what is it that we help them do and how do we do it? So who do we help? Most simply, CEO, owner, founder companies from $2 to $50 million in revenue that are in the bottom half of the profitability distribution. And that generally means negative to single digit profitability. But I do want to caution some of you. If you're making a a below market paycheck, you are subsidizing the bottom line of your company.
Yeah.
If before you quit your old company, you were making $350,000 a year, and now you're making $150,000, you are subsidizing the bottom line of your $2 million company by $200,000, or in that case, 10%. So if you think your company's making, in that example, 15% net profit, it's only because you are putting 10 points from your paycheck into the bottom line. I want you to take that out when you think, are you in double digit profitability? So basically, negative to single digit profitability after correcting for paying yourself a real salary. Those are the companies that we help. How do we help them? Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but we use that 10X principle because we laser in on profitability. And wouldn't it be great to take your $10 million company from a $500,000 net profitability to add 5 points, which is another 500,000? We often can get that done in 90 to 180 days for people. So the people who are hanging on for dear life, the things that are not working, we will help you unload that ballast. Number one, we'll help you with the psychology to appreciate the importance of profitability. We'll help you carve out the time to work on that thing and maximize your time so you can get there fastest with the fewest minutes or hours in the day, and then figure out what is the most important stuff to throw out of that hot air balloon, so to speak, that can make it rise the highest and the fastest.
Yeah, I think your approach is very practical, and that's very helpful for people because they need a sort of a framework of how to think about it, how to actually execute on it, and get to real answers. Where I think a lot of consultants will come in and ask a lot of questions. You already know the answers, and it doesn't really go anywhere. But you've spent some money, so I can appreciate that.
Thanks for pointing that out. I actually think that my genius zone, if you will, is how to get the biggest bang for the buck, the quickest with the least effort. In my heart, I think of what we do as hacks, shortcuts, cheat codes for profitability. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big believer in things like scaling up and EOS traction to build your business from the ground up and all the foundations and communications and systems and stuff like that. Super valuable, right? I'm not saying that that's not the right thing to do, but you could come to me first for 90 or 180 days, and I could get you another 5 or maybe 10 points of profitability that would dramatically jumpstart the rest of your journey, right? So we can hack, chop, shortcut, cheat code your way to, we'll just say 7 more points of profitability. And again, 7 points may not sound like a lot to you, but on a $10 million business, that's $700,000 of incremental profitability.
Yes, it is.
$2 million business, that's still $140,000 a year of net cash extra at the end of the day. And so that's where we feel like we add the most value. We come in, we work together on a short time horizon. You get that 5. A lot of our clients get 10 points of extra profitability in that very short time. Because again, we're not trying to solve everything. We're going to identify the worst offenders and tackle them first. And that's why the returns are, it's almost embarrassing how much money people make for the small fees that they send us.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. This is awesome. Such great value for our audience. And it's been a great conversation.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for having me. Look forward to hearing from some of your guests. Let me help you cure your profititis and, lighten your load as a CEO. There's a lot of heavy emotional baggage that comes with running a company that is really struggling when it comes to profitability. And I love seeing people's eyes light up, sleep better, a pep in their step, walking taller and cashing bigger checks.
That's awesome. Thanks again.
Okay. Thanks, Lee.